You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guest about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. Getting customer experience right isn't easy. I'm not just talking about the day-to-day getting CX right, but also making sure significant CX initiatives are actually successful. Want to get those right? Well, have a listen to today's CX Passport guest, Jo Boswell, who has a wealth of experience in just that, getting CX right. After an extensive customer experience career at British Airways, Jo created a CX consulting company, Sentio-B, dedicated to providing the support and encouragement for customer experience leaders that she wished she could have had when she was in the field. Jo led successful, financially significant CX initiatives for major, complex companies and knows what it takes. And yeah, you know how much I love travel, so you bet I'm eager to hear about the travel experiences of someone who worked for one of the world's most prominent airlines. Jo, welcome to CX Passport.
Thanks, Rick. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad to have you on. Let's start off with, I know it takes people with strong CX leadership skills to drive a company to have a strong CX focus. So what do you think are those skills that make a strong CX leader?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And actually, you probably won't be surprised to hear that the first thing I'm going to say is that they need to be able to demonstrate very strong commercial skills. And really, that is all about the ability to translate the benefits of what they're doing with any customer experience initiative or program into language that the business will understand. And, actually, if they're unable to get the benefits of their customer experience efforts to really resonate with the organization, I think it's just super hard to get traction. So commercial understanding and that relentless focus on results, I think is probably the first thing I would say.
Okay.
Moving on, then I think actually you've got to be an expert influencer.
Right.
So, with any kind of customer experience work, you're working right across the organization. And so I think customer experience leaders really need to hone their influencing skills to be able to really persuade, all those different areas of the business to come on board with the initiative that they're driving forward. So I think, honing those influencing skills is really important. I think the third thing they need is to be able to inspire and motivate colleagues right across the organization at all levels. So for me, that's about creating a really compelling internal narrative for the business so that people really get why it's important, but even more importantly, they're inspired and motivated to deliver on that and to make the changes and to adapt in the way that customer experience leader is asking of them. Sorry, are you going to say something?
Well, I was, but I actually want you to keep going because you've already, we're a minute in here and my mind is already sort of blown a little bit, but keep going with your list because I do want to hear the rest of your list, but I'm already thinking, wow, there's some things that are not immediately intuitive that I like about what you said. I want to explore.
Okay. So I'll have two more for you. So my fourth skill is about collaboration. And again, so often when I talk to customer experience leaders, the thing that they are really struggling with is how to join up the experience for customers when the organization is basically based around functions and departments. And so I see that the primary focus for a customer experience leader is to create that collaboration that enables the experience to be joined up for the customer and for the customer to experience, all of those different interactions in a far more joined up way. And so I think engendering that collaboration is really important, but it also needs to be underpinned with some great governance as well. So, some guardrails really that kind of keep everybody moving in the right direction and creating that platform to be able to have the right debates around, how to resolve some of the, perhaps conflicting issues that will inevitably occur in the day-to-day experiences. And my final sort of really critical asset for a customer experience leader is actually personal resilience.
Yes.
And
very true.
That's really is something that I speak very much from personal experience in this regard. But I think as a CX leader, we've just talked about the need to create this collaboration, to be an expert influencer, working right across the organization, getting different departments to collaborate in ways that they probably never have done before. That can be a really, really tough gig.
Boy,
and it isn't always going to go well. So I think in order to be able to sort of manage that ongoing challenge day to day, treating sort of setbacks just as sort of minor inconveniences, shall we say, then I think that personal resilience attribute is really critical.
There is so much that you have said in there. I'm going to start right off at the beginning of what you said, and that was, I may not have your exact words, but sort of you won't be surprised when I say, and yet your first thing was commercial aptitude, commercial experience, or business awareness. And actually, I think it is a growing awareness of those in the CX field that is vitally important to be for a CX leader. But I think historically that has been something that's been neglected. That in the CX space, it's been more about kind of the storytelling or the, say a survey result or something along those lines that help drive a business a particular direction, but there hasn't been great clarity into tying it to an actual dollar result. And I think that's why your history includes so many successful, as I said in the intro, financially significant CX, is that you are starting right there with, you're not going to have a whole lot of influence without the commercial reality and the commercial understanding.
Yeah.
And then something that kind of I find interesting, and I almost want you to unpack it just a little bit here, but you said influence is skill too, and then like getting people excited and motivating, and that aspect of it was the third skill. And so I'm curious how you see the difference between influence and then motivation and that aspect. We could talk about all the other skills, but then we get the whole podcast. But I'm curious how you define those two worlds.
Yeah, so I do see the two as distinct from each other, because actually I think the influence part tends to be at a much more senior level. So, that is about ensuring that, the stakeholders who have the ability to kind of, make or break whatever you're doing, who are the ones that are going to say, yes or no to the investment that you're seeking. That's the kind of influencing that I'm talking about in terms of a CX leader really needing to have traction at that very senior level, to have those senior leaders prepared to make the investments that are required, but more importantly, to back up the narrative with actions themselves. Mm-hmm. Because the organization will be looking for those little signals from senior leaders, and it's, I think, so important to ensure that they are seen to be absolutely right behind the initiative. Right. The kind of inspire and motivate piece is for colleagues at all levels.
I see.
So just as important, I think, at that very senior level, but then right across to the people who are day to day handling those customer interactions. And that is about really ensuring that you're creating the right environment for those colleagues to succeed and behave in a way that, the customer experience leader is seeking to execute.
You're hitting right at my heart on that one. I love the inspire category of the skill. It's one of my defaults. I probably go more towards that. That's what I love about the list, and we will put your list of skills in the show notes here so that folks can reference them later. But the idea of inspiring and storytelling and the emotion of it, that's what really gets me kind of excited. But I think it's important to go back to that first skill too, right? The one of but you can get all excited and it can be a really nifty story, but if it doesn't inspire, I'll make a little joke here, if it doesn't inspire the CFO, then we don't really have any CX initiative there. So
absolutely.
I think
exactly.
that's so vitally important. So I know you do this, and I know you're helping people grow their skills. How do you work with others to grow those CX leadership skills?
Yeah, so my approach is very much predicated on the premise that the CX leaders that I work with are best placed themselves to understand the specific challenges of their organization. But sometimes they just need a little bit of help to navigate those challenges. So I very much use a coaching approach that helps them sort of really objectively, kind of take a bit of a step back, objectively examine some of the obstacles, and then construct a very sort of pragmatic approach that is relevant and appropriate to their specific circumstances and organization.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think obviously to a certain extent, having had that practical experience myself, I can also use that, from time to time in a more advisory capacity as well. But it's very much about helping those leaders kind of realize their own potential through that coaching approach.
What I like about that approach too, and even as we had talked about before, and there in the intro we talked about how you wished you'd had someone doing this for you when you were in that CX role. But what I like about that coaching style is then it inspires them to be the coach to others, right? So CX is delivered across a multitude of points across an organization, and that coaching, if you've coached someone as a leader, then they can then take that same style as they grow and develop their teams. Now, I think that's as they grow and develop their teams or as they influence across the organization. So I know you've worked with people who are really strong in CX. They've developed these skills. They've got that list. But they're in an org that has this wide spectrum of strength in those CX skills. So how do you help leaders kind of advance CX, either initiatives or an overall CX approach, when the other leaders just aren't there yet?
Yeah, it's that's a really difficult challenge, isn't it? And,
really
and one that I think we sort of encounter frequently. But I think it comes back to that internal engagement approach. And I think it's really important to make an accurate assessment of what your starting point is.
Right.
And, who are the supporters around the business? Where are you knocking on open doors, and where are you likely to face pockets of resistance? And so, I use, some practical toolkits really in terms of that kind of stakeholder mapping approach, and then really thinking through a very pragmatic way to start to overcome and that some of the resistance and influence those key stakeholders towards a different outcome. So again, it comes back to a lot of those skills that we've already talked about, kind of all wrapped up in terms of creating that narrative, but then being able to demonstrate the results and create the compelling business case when that is required. So if it's an organization that's starting out that is potentially facing some fairly big issues from a technical or data perspective, then I would very much encourage that leader to take a pragmatic approach and get some early wins. So, that's always sort of one of the things that I preach: relentless focus on results, and then really shout about them when they come.
And that's both of those are important. I both have kind of given me a little thought here. It goes back to that results, that business awareness, that thing. But I like the phrase that you said, go knock on open doors. And I think there's such a temptation for all of us to look for what is the greatest challenge. Where can we, make the biggest impact? And sometimes that biggest impact has some barriers in front of it that you might be best served going after something that's not necessarily the biggest impact, but you'll have that quick win, and you can walk around the building or in the virtual building and hold that up high and say, "Look what we did," and that to inspire others. I definitely appreciate that approach that you're bringing there.
Very pragmatic.
It does not surprise me to hear that pragmatic approach. And I think, again, that's why you are the fount of successful CX initiatives and guiding people to create these successful CX initiatives. So now let's talk travel just a little bit, right? So I know you've got a wealth of experience in the travel space, both professionally and personally. So what have you seen work well in the travel industry from a CX perspective?
Yeah, so I think, in airlines in particular, in travel, obviously it's an environment where a lot can go wrong and often does go wrong. And,
yes.
And it can be, at times a sort of, a really big crisis affecting a lot of customers simultaneously. So I think one of the most important things to do is to have the systems and processes in place to proactively put that right in the moment. Mm-hmm. And I certainly saw the power of that when I was working at BA, where, often the satisfaction scores with customers who had something go wrong in their journey, but where that had been recovered proactively and with empathy, those satisfaction scores were often higher than they were for customers where everything went absolutely to plan, with a punctual flight and so on. So I think it's crucial to have the environment where frontline colleagues are able to demonstrate that empathy, and that often comes through having the right customer information to know what has happened to this person, but also the ability through business processes to be able to proactively rectify it. And I think customers who travel very often are, they acknowledge that these things will go wrong. They know that can happen, but if the colleagues that are dealing with them can do that sensitively and with empathy, then I think they are likely to be far more forgiving. So just acknowledging that there has been that problem, I think is a really important first step.
Jo, a little change of pace here. Sometimes when those trips do go wrong, it is nice to have access to the lounge. And so I want to invite you here to join me in the first class lounge. We'll move quickly here and hopefully have some fun. What is a dream travel location from your past?
Well, this was a really, really tricky one. You've got some tough questions, I think. So I would say I have spent a lot of time in Cape Town, which I truly love as a destination that has great food and wine as well as fabulous scenery. But I think I'm going to have to go, instead of that, I'm going to have to go with Cuba because it's where I met my husband.
Aww.
Yeah.
So that's always going to have a special place in your heart. Now,
absolutely.
For those that don't know the full context, I am an American. Jo is talking to me from the UK, so I don't have access to that destination. So I have a little bit of envy hearing you, and I've talked to my Canadian friends and how they go down to Cuba. I've heard brilliant things there, but I can certainly see why it would be a special place in your heart if that's where you met your husband. Oh, that's
hopefully
awesome.
You can get there one day.
I do hope for that. I sincerely hope for that. So maybe that's a dream travel location that I've not been to yet, but what about you? What is a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
So one that is definitely on the list at some point is the Galapagos Islands.
Nice.
Yeah, so I have friends who've been and come back absolutely raving, and I enjoy holidays that are looking at wildlife and and locations that are really, different and unfamiliar. And I think that ticks a lot of the boxes.
Boy, does it ever. Yeah, it definitely hits all those boxes there. You mentioned the good food in Cuba. What is a favorite thing overall to eat?
Yeah, no, that was super tough because I do like food. I ended up, I think I'm just going to have to pick bread, actually,
Hey,
because if
all right.
somebody said to me, you could never have baguette or a really great crusty sourdough ever again, I would be truly disappointed.
Jo, I'm hearing a lot of similarities between you and me that I did not know. I have frequently said to people that if I had to, I would be able to live life solely on French bread, cheese, and wine, and I would be
Yeah,
satisfied for the rest
yeah,
of my days.
yeah. That's a very good picnic, I think.
Well, yeah, a picnic, and sometimes when you're a backpacker in Europe on a college budget, perhaps it's the only meal that's
Yes.
affordable. So, true experience. So, on the flip side, what is a thing your parents forced you to eat but you hated as a kid?
Well, I have to say, I was very lucky growing up, in that I was a picky eater,
Okay.
and my parents were very, I wouldn't say indulgent,
Okay.
but they kind of just gave me the time and space to discover, food
Mm-hmm.
and variety in food in my own time and at my own pace. So there was probably about a year of my life when I don't know, when I was 8 or 9, where I survived on egg and chips.
Oh gosh.
And that was after a particularly horrendous shepherd's pie that had been served to me at school that I could, found it very difficult to keep it down. And but over time, then I just started experimenting with lots of different foods. And today, I would say there's virtually nothing that I don't eat. Virtually nothing.
That's right. Well, I love the spirit of exploration there, and I'm sure that there would be plenty of guides that might say, "Hey, let the child explore there." But I've also heard plenty of things that children have been forced to eat. So we may call yours shepherd pie for the category, but
Yes.
we'll see.
School shepherd pie.
Yeah,
Shepherd's
well,
pie.
that's
Yeah,
true,
yeah.
right? School cafeteria can be a totally different experience. So, not including a phone, of course, but what is one thing that you will not travel without?
Yeah, that is an easy one. That is my eye shades. They accompany me everywhere, and they're an absolute godsend.
So, Jo, going back to where we started our conversation, you may have noticed I specifically didn't say a leader of a CX org. I seem to see so much discussion over where CX should sit, but I wonder if that's focusing the discussion on the wrong topic. What do you think about that debate of where CX should sit and those conversations?
Yeah, I get very frustrated about that particular debate. I see a lot of opinion pieces
Right.
about the subject of customer experience as well, when in fact people are talking about customer service a lot of
Mm,
the time. And I mean, really, ultimately, the only place that all of these responsibilities come together is with the CEO.
right.
So I advocate obsessing a lot less about job titles and the organizational structure, and really focusing a lot more on that collaboration and
Hmm.
influencing that we talked about earlier. Because that's what you need to do to drive the cultural change. You're not going to have the responsibility that the CEO has, but you need to be really kind of galvanizing the whole organization in a way a CEO would,
Right.
to all drive in the same direction.
I think, and one of the things that you've inspired me with when I've heard you talk before and even hearing you talk now is that spirit of CX can be really and can be and should be anywhere and everywhere. And the skills that it takes to be a quote CX leader really can be manifested anywhere throughout the organization,
Yeah.
and almost an organization that is the most customer centric, and there's varying degrees of what that even means. I'm certainly not trying to introduce a debate around what does customer centric mean, but it's that spirit, and I like how you've sort of centered folks around these are just the skills of what it takes to be a CX leader, not
Yeah.
this is where a CX leader should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And each organization, I think, is different. So, those decisions about sort of formal authority and responsibility, they will be different for every organization.
Right.
So there's no kind of one size, just as with customer experience, there's no one size fits all for the org structure. And I think it's about, really tuning in to the specifics,
Right.
and the characteristics of an organization to work out what is most appropriate.
That and exactly that, right? That spectrum, that just recognize that there is no one size fits all. So I know that I first heard you on Bill Stakos's brilliant Be Customer Led podcast. Now, listeners, go out there right now, hit pause, search up Be Customer Led podcast, find Joe's episode, grab a download, and then come back to CX Passport to hear the rest of Joe's wisdom. But you said something that caught my ears. And actually, you said a lot of things, but I'll focus on one right now around assessing value when there are so many collective or competing variables being assessed. And if that was your number one skill, kind of that business orientation, and then that's how it feeds into influence and results, how do you guide companies to wade through all of those variables to find the right ones to address?
Well, I think, it comes back to how are you going to get that ongoing support from senior stakeholders, and really focusing on the outcomes that the organization is seeking in business terms, and figuring out how, as a CX leader, you can make changes that will add up, and affect those positive outcomes for the business. And I think it's about being really pragmatic with that. You may have a destination in mind as a CX leader of some fantastic ways in which you can revolutionize the experience, but if you can't demonstrate the business impact in terms of improving overall the financial health of the company, it will be really, really hard to get support and traction for that. So, I think it comes back to that pragmatic approach that focuses on results, demonstrates results, gives you the ongoing air cover, and then gives you the permission to continue to invest.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that because you've worked in, I mean, let's be honest, British Airways is possibly one of the most complex. It was one of the most global airlines from the beginning. And all the different things that go into delivering a great customer experience, both the day-to-day experience and then the ongoing initiatives, what that looks like in an airline is just super complex. And so as I understate it there with those words, but to hear you, how you've kind of broken that down is important. I think I want to close out here with another kind of travel, but I want to go back to something that we talked about right there before we entered the first class lounge. And you talked about, and it's so true, right? The great, just sort of straight line, great customer experience often delivers less stickiness or less of an emotional connection to someone that had a disappointment and then it was restored to them. And you said something that caught my ear, and it was both the systems in place to handle that proactively, but then also the empathy. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, because those are left brain, right brain, it mixes those two worlds together. How have you seen that? How do companies get that right? Those specifically, developing the proactive and then getting that empathy right. Because I'll be honest, I've had a lot of travel lately. I'm not seeing that as often as I'd like to. So how do companies get that part right?
Yeah, and I think that is so important. And for me, that's about really working very closely with whoever is responsible for the brand. What does the brand stand for?
Yeah.
And also, how does that translate into a set of service standards? Mm-hmm. And I think as a CX leader, you need to be working hand in glove with the people who are responsible for setting what those service standards are, and also the whole sort of training and coaching approach that reinforces the right kind of behavior from frontline employees. So it's you need the overarching narrative that reminds people why it's important and what they need to do, But then you also need to translate that into a set of standards that they know they need to live up to, and they will be measured against. And then you need to reinforce those behaviors by celebrating it when it goes really well, and making sure that those stories resound sort of loud and clear around the organization, and create that positive feedback loop with frontline employees. And I think those sorts of steps can really take it a long way to encouraging the right approach and encouraging colleagues to take the initiative and put things right for the customer, because they know that is the behavior that will get rewarded and recognized.
I love it. You and I are of such similar mindsets there and that celebrate and inspire. It is storytelling. We talk about all the time, but how many companies are getting it right? How many aren't there? And there's just such a wealth of motivational impact in the storytelling there.
Absolutely.
Well, Jo, I've absolutely enjoyed. Once again, I'm coming out of here with a ton of wisdom, and I greatly appreciate that. I love even how you've almost kind of in the last question linked us back to the first question, and that is talking about things like inspiration and using that to influence, and how standards and all of that and the collaboration that takes place, all of that builds these skills, or are the foundation blocks of the skills of a great CX leader, and how that then translates into successful CX initiatives. It's been great to hear about your travel experiences. I do hope you get to the Galapagos very soon. And I hope that is a trip in your near-term future. But Jo, thank you so much for this brilliant wisdom that you provided, both in the CX space and the travel stories that you've offered. I've enjoyed every bit of talking with you today, and I wish you the best of the rest of your day. Thank you, Jo.
So thanks for inviting me, Rick. And actually, if anybody wants to get in touch because they would like to know more about the coaching approach, then I'm very happy to have a sort of free introductory call. So people can either look me up on LinkedIn. I hope you'll put the contact details in.
Jo, show nights are going to have all about Jo and how to get in touch with her and the best ways to get in touch for sure, Jo. Absolutely. Great. I would hate for anyone not to have the opportunity to dive into the wisdom that you have. So thank you for being on the episode. Again, wonderful to hear from you, and I would certainly wish you the best.
Thank you, Rick.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. Make sure to visit our website, cxpassport.com, where you can hit subscribe so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, you can check out the rest of the EX for CX website. If you're looking to get real about customer experience, EX for CX is available to help you increase revenue by starting to listen to your customers and create great experiences for every customer, every time. Thanks for listening to CX Passport, and be sure to tune in for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.